I was talking last night with a fellow who is an expert in international trade policy. He's been an advisor to presidents and whatnot. And it was, I'm not going to name him. It was an off the record conversation. But I basically said to him, what should we do about North Korea? And he said we should pull all our troops out of South Korea and Japan and just leave the region. And I was like, that's got to be the most radical solution I've ever heard. But, and he said, well, why do we need to be the world's policeman? We won World War II. Japan has been a significant power ever since then. China can certainly defend themselves. South Korea has lots of resources. What do you think of that? Is that a nutty idea?
I think it's absolutely, well, I think that it's nutty in the sense that it doesn't serve the interests of the military industrial complex. And
Right.
so if you think about like what are US interests within the region, is it really peace? Is it? I mean, like, or, because in fact, point of fact, the way that the US presence is justified, the military presence is justified, is in the name of peace and prosperity within the region. But is that indeed what has been achieved by this long-standing, what Chalmers Johnson called a US empire of bases within the region? I mean, you can argue actively that it has not. And so, I'd say that like right now, let's look at the landscape as it exists. We have a president in the White House who has stated that his priorities are the military industrial complex. He wants to raise the war budget to $54 billion while defunding social services. That's not an America First policy. That's a military industrial complex first policy. He has a businessman's approach to the military industrial complex. We've seen recently that in Saudi Arabia, he was hawking U.S. weapons systems. It's hard to say to what degree he actually delivered $110 billion worth of sales, but he's also in Poland hawking Patriot missiles. He's hawked weapons also to Taiwan, and so it's not that there isn't merit to thinking those possibilities of removing US forces from the region. It's just that if you're thinking in terms of a kind of realpolitik, which we don't have to, but the military industrial complex will not be for that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I haven't seen any evidence of expansionistic tendencies coming out of North Korea, but certainly
Exactly.
we have out of China. Um, but are we even in a position to force our will on China militarily?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you can say that you haven't seen like that China actually has had expansionist sort of tendencies, and people point to Chinese development in Africa and in other areas. And of course, like if you want to think about like the nature of AFRICOM, the U.S. sort
Right.
of military command in Africa, you have to think about it also as an anti-China policy.
Yeah, we're talking with Christine Hong, associate professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, executive board member of Korea's Policy Institute, their website, kpolicy.org, and their Twitter handle at kpolicyo. Christine, we were talking just a minute ago about number one, whether the United States should even consider leaving the region. I was mentioning to you a consultant I was talking with last night was like, why don't we just pull U.S. troops out of South Korea and Japan? They're big boys now, to use his phrase. But then that what does that do to our relationship with China? Is North Korea an expansionist power? Are they I've seen no evidence that they're trying to do anything other than just keep their people in the gulag essentially. And but then is China an expansionist power? I mean, they've certainly been moving to the west. And so anyhow, all that whole montage of stuff. You want to speak to it? And what should the United States be doing?
Like I actually will say a number of things. One is that no, we have no evidence that North Korea is an expansionist power. And in fact, if you want to go back to, you mentioned Gulag, and I'd like to address that, the
Please.
human rights point as well. But, if we go back to one of the primary political theorists of the camp, the concentration camp, Hannah Arendt, when she theorized totalitarianism, she actually stated that expansionism is a key feature of totalitarianism, because she understood totalitarianism as actually extending from imperialist tendencies. So I want us to keep that in mind so that we have a kind of rigorous understanding of
Sure.
of,
By the way,
of
Christine, we just have a minute and a half left.
Okay, well, I would say this. Basically, I mentioned before that the US policy has been one of encircling China, but it's taken North Korea as its excuse. Right now, what's happening is Nikki Haley, as of yesterday at the UN Security Council, was stating that the United States has to entertain a possible military action against North Korea, which would be disastrous not just for North Korea, but also South Korea, which is a historic ally of the United States. At the same time, practically over at the G20, Trump is there, and so is Moon Jae-in, who is the liberal president, recently elected president of South Korea. What has Moon Jae-in been saying in Germany, a country that was historically divided at the end of World War II, as was Korea, even though Korea, unlike Germany, was not a perpetrator during World War II of any kind of war violence. It was a colony of Japan. But what is Moon Jae-in saying? He's saying that there should be no renewal of another war on the Korean Peninsula, and
Right.
indeed that there should be a cessation of the extant Korean War, and that there needs to be a peace treaty. And I think that we have to actually think about the wisdom of that kind of solution from someone who is on the peninsula and has witnessed, as a human rights lawyer, former political prisoner during the period of right-wing dictatorships in South Korea, which were backed by the United States. We have to take that suggestion very, very seriously.
Yeah, and this is the newly elected president of South Korea saying these things. This is not, yeah, it's remarkable. Christine Hong, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your insights. We'll be back.